Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by The Artist Index and sponsored by Heavenly Spirits. And as per usual, I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves and ask them to please spell their name because there's always something in there. To just at least take the chill off the beginning of the conversation and have a little bit of fun too. Guest?
Sure. Hi, Ron. I am Paul Pedulla, and my last name is spelled Pedulla.
Any difficulties with that last name? In spelling, or people mispronunciating it?
It's funny, most people get it right.
Really?
But occasionally I'll get Pedulla or something like that.
Yeah.
But Pedulla is how we say it.
Yeah. It's funny because down south, no one really had trouble with my name, and they actually pronounced it closer to the way it's supposed to sound, Fortier. And
the French version.
Yeah, but up here, oh my God, it's Fortin, Forest, Fornier. I mean, it's just it's just insane.
Well, it's an Italian name, and supposedly the original name had an accent at the end, which made the last syllable really should have been the accent. So
Pedulla?
Yeah, but we don't say it that way, and it just got anglicized, I guess.
Yeah, like a lot of things do.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to ask you, because I have never an agenda with this. It's whatever pops into my mind and things that I know about the guests and such. You have a connection to Michigan.
Yes.
Which I'm very curious about, because my wife is from Detroit, and I'm finding so many people from this area that have some connection to Michigan. It's in Detroit in some cases specifically, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. I have a number of connections with Michigan, but my main connection is I am represented by Saugatuck Art Traders in Saugatuck in Western Michigan, which you may have been there. It's a beach town on Lake Michigan, very popular with Chicago people and Detroit people as well, and of course Grand Rapids. But I've been represented by them since August of 2016. It's been 5 years, and they sell a ton of my work. They're probably my number one gallery right now. I'm represented by 8 galleries nationwide now, and Saugatuck Art Traders is probably number one, or if not, they vie with another gallery here and there, but
yeah, I have seen your Instagram posts of sale.
Yeah.
So obviously we haven't been on the West Coast as of yet. I mean, I still want to explore the mitten, so to speak. And my wife knows that I want to go up to, was it Mackinac?
Oh, right.
Up towards there. There was a movie, I don't know if you remember it, with Paul Newman and Eli Wallach, called The Adventures of a Young Man. It was it's one of Steinbeck's novels that they made into a movie. It was just pre-World War I, and it showed him growing up in that area, and it was a black and white film, and I was just astounded by the scenery. Of course, knowing Hollywood, it was probably someplace in Eastern Canada, or
Right.
because it looked more authentic. They did that around here. I think there was some town. It was some New England town, and they decided to go and shoot a town in California because it looked more New Englandy.
Right. I'm actually going to be in Saugatuck next month. There'll be a few meet and greet sessions with meet the artist and Q&As. some events on the 20th and the 21st, which are Friday and Saturday of August. My partner is coming with me, and we're flying to Chicago. The gallery's picking me up at the airport, and it's about a 2-hour ride from O'Hare. So looking forward to that. And the other connection I have with Michigan is I've gotten calls and emails from people from the Detroit area just who have seen my work various places, usually online. And I just sold a piece to somebody in Grosse Pointe 2 weeks ago, who was in my own studio in Boston. And also prior to that, there was a woman in Novi who my work had come to her attention as well. And she ended up buying 2 pieces of mine that were, one was with Serena and Lily in their San Diego design shop. She bought that piece. And then she also bought a piece from JCO's Art House in Los Gatos, California. They represent me as well. And so she bought both of those pieces, and she lives in Novi, Michigan. So you just never know where these things come from.
I mean, we have a Swain graduate, Clayton Lewis, who's works at UMich in Ann Arbor. Friend of mine, big collector, Dr. Richard Connor, evolutionary biologist and phenomenal collector, and also representative of mid 20th century estates, painters' estates. He went to UMich, and then there's Marcia Hales, who was down in this area. She knows this area quite well. Another artist. So it's just a really interesting connection between the 2 states. In fact, I think one of our native sons was a Michigan governor. So it even gets curiouser, you know. When did you come to that age of enlightenment, that age of knowing that this art stuff seemed to be pretty interesting and you were going to give it a shot, devote your life? Whatever.
Well, it didn't happen to me until 2005. The idea occurred to me. I almost literally woke up one day and said, I have to paint. And I told my partner, I don't know where it's coming from, but I feel like I have to paint. And I had never really picked up a brush before. The only art experience I'd had before this was when I was a kid. I would draw all the time, and I ended up, sitting in math class, and I'd draw houses on my, in the margins of my notebook. And I remember very vividly being in the 8th grade and realizing that was the last year that art was going to be mandatory, and that once I started high school, I was no longer required to take art. And I was really sad that I wasn't going to be in art class anymore. But I just kind of, went on to high school, went on to college, and never really gave it a second thought until 2006, when I woke up, and said, I have to paint. So I got, into some, I also knew that I wanted to paint acrylic for some reason. That may sound odd, but because I have an advertising background and I love graphic looking things, I just thought acrylic was going to be my medium. And I went looking for classes that would be acrylic oriented. And I found one in Somerville, Massachusetts, a funny little art school called the School of Painting by Catherine Martin Widmer, who's an artist. And I took classes with her, and I just basically went on from there, got my studio space, and I really had no idea it was going to get so big. It was, just a hobby at that time. And I thought, that's probably what it'll be, but it didn't take long. It's almost as though as soon as I made the decision to paint, all these doors just started opening kind of quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess it was meant to be.
Yeah, it's true. Let's ratchet it back to the massive jaw drop when you said you didn't stop painting until then, and then I mean, and you've been both sustained and supported by your art, which is led to that massive jaw drop. God bless. My question is going to be, I guess you partially answered it. What did you major in college?
English.
It was English. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a writer. So in advertising, I was a writer, not an art director.
All right. So I see. I assumed right away the art thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting too. What's that?
It's unusual that a writer would end up becoming a painter, but I know I always had art in my head and in my hands. It was just there.
Yeah, because I mean, I was a painter, making believe I was a layout artist and a writer while I wasn't a painter. It's like this kind of, and it's all about timing. I've said that a dozen times. It's all about timing. Has nothing to do with luck. And that light that goes on in your head, that serendipitous, whisper, or sometimes it's a dong, like a real loud noise. I think sometimes there's two parts to us that sometimes travel with us in a parallel dimension and then cross over at some point. I think when the time is right. Yeah.
It seemed like the time was right, and late, maybe maybe not. I don't know. Yeah. It felt like the right time to me. And of course I had no idea where to show my work. I'd show friends and family, and they never knew what to say about anything I was doing, of course. Yeah. But then I had artist friends who said, "Oh, I really like what you're doing." And I had one friend in particular, Kenny Mack. I don't know if you know him. He's an artist in Boston. He said to me, "You should enter the juried program of South End Open Studios and see if you can get in." And I said, "Really? You think so?" And I did, and they did take me, and I was in the juried program there. And those were, at the time, I have a South End studio now, but at the time, of course I didn't. And I was in this juried program, and we were set up in a temporary spot for South End Open Studios in September. And I had so much traffic. I had galleries that were interested in my work. And Brian Goslow from Art Scout magazine showed up. I had no idea who he was, and I didn't know what to say to him. And finally he identified himself, and he really liked my work. And before you know it, he was writing about me. So a lot of things just fell into place pretty quickly.
I mean, what is this thing for houses? Or is that still inexplicable?
I think it's perhaps inexplicable, but I also have a thing for beaches. You've probably seen. Mm-hmm. So I very rarely paint winter. Beach cottages are a common theme. A lot of landscapes that don't have any houses or structures in them too. But the houses, I think growing up where I did in Chelmsford, Massachusetts at the time, in the 60s and 70s, there was a lot of construction going on. So I would witness these homes going up, and I would think, oh, I really like that. I want to draw that house. And so I think it probably goes back to that originally, but then the rest of the coastal thing kind of came later.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because your work, I think, goes through, represents a range of emotions. Sometimes it's a snug and smug little house just warming itself in the sun. It's very, very quiet. And sometimes, you can look at it with another eye, so to speak, and it's like the surreal silent scream, that there's been an impact of some sort, and you don't know if you are witnessing that impact just before, because we're intuitive sometimes. We hear the explosion before we hear the explosion,
right?
Or is it during the moment, or is it directly after? The reverberation. So they're not as benign.
No, they're open to interpretation, certainly.
Yeah.
I do have a lot of people coming into my studio saying, "Oh, it's there. I feel so calm. I feel so peaceful," and I think that's the most common thing I hear. Mm-hmm. Occasionally, people will say, oh, they're a little bit lonely too, which is something I hear once in a while. The roads are, people definitely respond to the roads. You've probably noticed that I paint a lot of roads too. And for me, they're metaphors. I think that we don't know where the road is going to lead us in life. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't
A
know
good example.
beyond the curve. So my roads are very open to interpretation. I'll even have beach roads or roads in the sand where somebody from Cape Cod will say, oh, that's clearly the Outer Cape. Somebody from California will say, oh, I recognize that as being, coastal Pacific. Someone in Texas will say, that's West Texas, and especially if there's no water in the scene, they'll just assume that it's about a desert. In fact, I recently sold a piece in Dallas. I'm represented there too. And it was sold to a commercial real estate company. And I have no doubt that they interpreted the road painting as something in the western Texas area.
Has anyone ever brought up the name or made a parallel between you and Edward Hopper?
I do get it occasionally in my studio. People say, "Oh, I like Hopper, and your work reminds me of him." I really, I haven't followed Hopper too closely, but since people were mentioning it, I would go and look at what he did, and I do love his work. He's wonderful.
Okay, yeah, because I think we all know what it's like to be compared to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly started painting before I really knew much about him. So it's not like I can't really say he was an influence, but I do like his work a lot.
All right, so let's talk about process. Where do the themes, the motifs, the subjects, the ideas come from?
Mostly my head. So if I see something I like, I'll take a photo of it. Or people will send me photos, and if I like them, I'll use them. But my work almost entirely is sort of half memory, half imagination. So for the most part, the pieces are not necessarily real places, but certainly they evoke those places, and they are open to interpretation. So someone could look at one of my beach cottages, for example, and say, oh, I feel like I know that house in Truro. Or someone in California could see something else. I get a lot of Europeans in my Boston studio, and often they'll come in and say, oh, those cottages, they're just like such and such in the Netherlands or such and such in France. And I think it's all valid because they're not necessarily real places. In some cases, they are. I do have a couple of paintings of Days cottages in North Truro that really are those cottages. I've done a lot of commissions for people that really are what they're asking me to paint. But the vast majority of my work is half memory, half imagination. So any interpretation is valid.
All right. Do you go through that process of making multiple sketches, composing, or does it just go straight onto the canvas?
Usually straight onto the canvas. I'll make a few rudimentary lines sometimes. Sometimes I'll have a sketch that I'll bring with me to the studio, not often. And then other times I'll have a photo that I'll bring with me to the studio too.
Okay. All right. Your palette, limited and uniform and consistent. And those are meant to be, good observations.
Well, yeah, thank you. And the blues are all different in that, of course, I mix my colors every time. So each one is slightly different from another, but there is certainly a theme. And I get this all the time from people that follow my work. Oh, that's Paul Pedulla blue. But Paul Pedulla blue is, it's a range of things because it's variations on a theme, really.
Yeah.
And I do tend to paint fair skies as opposed to cloudy skies, with some exceptions. If you go to my if you go to paulpedulla.com, you'll see other types of skies as well. But the vast majority of them are fair skies with some clouds, but minimal clouds for the most part.
Not that I've seen every piece of your work, but the sun's presence is present in the facade of the building more than, so it's never behind a building, or more than usual, more than likely not behind the building, but in front of the building.
Most of the time, right. I'll paint a shadow line in the majority of my paintings, but usually the shadow line is, on a gable in one section of it.
Always almost midday, pretty much.
Yeah, midday roof line.
All right.
Yeah.
So any inkling of what's next?
It's funny. I often don't know what I'm going to paint until I'm just about to go into the studio, and there are some exceptions to that. Sometimes I'll get an idea. It could be in the shower. It could be, when I'm walking down the street, and I'll say, I'm going to go paint that idea in the studio, and I'll actually have a mission when I go to the studio. And other times, if there's a commission that someone's asking me to paint, obviously that's another mission. But there are times when I go in and I don't have any idea what I'm going to paint. And those are really fun experiences because I really let the painting happen. And I actually, if I find myself painting in a forceful way, I'll say, well, Paul, are you painting? I hope not, because you got to let this painting happen. Don't try and paint it without just letting it happen. I had an interesting question once from someone else who was interviewing me about my work. This goes back to 2013. And he said, your work is so personal. So many people can relate to it on a personal level, but there's no people in your paintings. Why is that? And the only answer I could think of was, I don't always know what I'm going to paint until I get in the studio. And if I'm supposed to paint a figure, I'll know. It'll happen to me, and I'll go into the studio and paint it. It wasn't even 6 months after that interview that my first figure painting appeared. And I've been painting figures ever since then, but they are less common for me than my other work. I do love painting them, however.
There's the simplicity is what is actually what reigns supreme.
Yes.
Even your approach. I mean, when I was a self-avowed abstractionist, I would go into the studio with the same mindset, had really no idea what I was going to do. And it was always based on the first mark that I made, would set everything in motion, because that's, Picasso's, the first act of creation is an act of destruction.
Right.
And then you go galloping off from there. So with that kind of a free spirit mindset, my question to you is, I want to go back to your very first commission, and how much alike or unlike was it from your work?
Okay, so I'm really fussy about a commission. I won't accept a commission unless it's somebody who knows what I do, likes what I do, and asks me to do something similar. So the most often request I'll get is somebody who has gone to my website and said, I like this piece, but they're sold. What can you do for me? And then I will say, I don't duplicate the painting, but knowing what you like, I think I can create something that is really my style and something you'll like. And I'll do a quick sketch, and you let me know if this is what you're looking for. I've been very fortunate in that approach has worked very well. I've never had a problem with a commission. They've all been well loved. I do have one I'm working on right now for someone in Michigan, actually, and it's their home. It's a lakefront home, but it's not a house portrait because they know I won't do a house portrait. I said, and they've given me the artist license to sort of take off with it and do what I want with it, to sort of evoke the feeling of their home without necessarily doing a house portrait, as long as, and they really want me to do it my way. So that, I don't think there's much of a problem. You have a great question, and so far I've been fortunate in that the people that are asking me to do commissions are just as attracted to the minimalism that I like, and they want me to continue that style. I always tell people what I leave out of my work is just as important as what I put in. And for those that can see that, I know that I can make them happy with a commission.
The other thing too about your work, using the old art history term staffage, there's no staffage, there's no figures present in it. I think perhaps it's maybe because the viewer is the staffage, the viewer is the subject in the painting.
I think that's true in a lot of the cases, but you will see quite a few figures in. I started off painting figures in sort of abstract interior settings. That's how I started my first one back in, I think it was November of 2013. It was a woman in a interior with a sofa in front of her. And when I finished the painting, I laughed because I said, oh my God, this is my first figure painting, but it still looks just like a Paul Pedulla painting. It's still a minimalist work. And it's almost like I could tell that it was, if someone knew my work, they could tell it was mine, even though it was my first figure.
Right.
It wasn't until, I think probably 2 or 3 years after that, maybe 2015 or 2016, when I actually incorporated a figure into one of my common scenes. Like it was called Dune Dude, and it's a guy walking in the sand dunes with the ocean beyond, and we can see, he's really the main focus of the painting. But before that, I was really pretty much just focusing on figures in interior abstract settings. So I did marry the two, and I continue to do that now.
All right. And then speaking of that, any glimpses of the future as to where the work is going to go, or?
I'm really open-ended with it. I just continue to paint what I like to paint, and what I like to paint has evolved over the years. I would say I'm more minimal now than I was when I started painting in 2006. So that has evolved. But subject matter wise, certainly I'm going to continue to paint cottages. I'm going to continue to paint landscapes. I'm going to continue to paint beachscapes. And I'm going to continue to paint figures. I think it just, it's going to depend on the moment. I really like to stay in the moment. So for me to actually predict where it's going to be in the future would be difficult. It would keep me out of the moment, basically.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I know you have a place up in Maine, right?
Yes.
Okay. How much of that, again, I haven't seen all of your work. How much of that has creeped into your work, if at all?
Well, so our primary residence is in Boston, Cambridge, actually, and we do have a place in Kennebunk, Maine, and also in Miami Beach, Florida. So both of those places are coastal, and so that is an influence. It's funny, I think most of my work, to me, appears New Englandish, and that could be Cape Cod, it could be Maine. Certainly both are influences. I would spend most of my time as a kid on Cape Cod with family. So the Cape remains a very big influence. And I used to have a second home in Provincetown. But now we're in Maine, and we like it there too. So, and I think one of my problems is I like every place.
Yeah.
It's not like my work doesn't really have a geography.
Okay.
There's so many places that it can apply to. And as far as Miami Beach is concerned, I had people say to me, you're spending a lot of time in Miami Beach. Why are you never painting palm trees? Why are you never painting? And so I finally started doing that too, because I actually had a piece in the ArtScope magazine booth at Art Basel in 2019, which was the last time Art Basel was there. Right. And that was basically based on a photograph I took on Ocean Drive with palm trees. And I eliminated the cars. I eliminated everything in my typical minimalist way. And that painting became Beyond the Coral Sidewalk, which can be seen on my website now.
Yeah, I as you were speaking, I was going back, up and down Collins Avenue, and I don't know if the old Barcelona is still there next door, the world famous Fontainebleau.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, the Champlain Towers.
Oh God!
My
yeah.
God.
Oh, yeah.
We're
in the low-rise Art Deco district in South Beach, so it's a very different.
When I was at the University of Miami, South Beach was Skid Row. It was they were just beginning the restoration, the rescue of that. So much have changed.
It really has.
Yeah, it's easy to get mesmerized by the colors down there as well. And there's a bunch of other things that are there, but I don't know. I think painting Miami scenes would probably be more challenging than painting the scenes that you paint now of New England, for lots of reasons. Yeah,
the ones I have done, I've really liked, and I think I'll continue doing more. It's hard to say. It's a fun area, and there's a lot of opportunity there too. The South Coast, where you are, and I show it at the same gallery as you in Newport, Rhode Island, Coastal Contemporary Gallery. That's been a big influence lately too. I love Newport. I love that area, and I think that is a beautiful spot to look at too. So, it's like I say, I just don't have a geography. I think when I go to Saugatuck next month, I'm gonna love what I see there too. It's just there's beauty everywhere, and since your imagination is part of it, I'm willing to let the geography I'm in blend with my imagination and create something.
When you were talking about places and so on and so forth, I couldn't help but think about The Night Train to Lisbon. I don't know if you've ever read the book or saw the movie.
No.
The movie stars Jeremy Irons, and it's for some people, if they like bang bang shoot 'em ups, this is a head movie. You really have to get your head into the movie and pay attention to what's going on, especially since the main character is considered to be boring. Which is interesting. But the driving force behind the whole movie is this physician named Amadeo de Prado, who was a prolific writer, and his sister put together all of his manuscripts. And one of the quotes, and the movie and the book was so realistic that people actually believed that this man existed, which he didn't. So it's a book about a book that never existed. And he has a quote from the book. We leave something of ourselves behind when we leave a place. We stay there even though we go away. And there are things in us that we can find only again by going back there. We travel to ourselves when we go to a place. Now we have covered a stretch of our lives, no matter how brief it may have been. And, I'm dyslexic, and I know I've got something called positional or geographic dyslexia. It's kind of weird. I will get confused between two locations, and they could be, a couple of miles or hundreds of thousands of miles away from each other. It just gets wedged in my head, and I can't remember which one is which. I don't know why that happens, but there are people, for example. Okay, let me ask you the question rather than prattling on about this. Do people find a meditative respite or a source in your work, or have they sometimes bought them because they help them meditate?
I would say the answer to that is definitely yes. I mean, I don't know about meditation in the strict sense of the word, certainly the work is meditative to many people, and I find a lot of people are purchasing my work because they find peace around it. I actually had a woman in my studio, last month, I guess it was, from California. And she had been looking at my work for, I think, quite a while, like a year or more. And she'd been wanting to meet me. And she ended up purchasing a piece from me while she was at my studio and brought it back to where she lives in the San Jose area. And I actually got an email from her shortly after she got back with a photograph of the work on her wall saying, I wake up to it every morning. I absolutely love how peaceful it makes me start my day. And thank you so much. And it was so fulfilling to receive that email. And I often get emails in that sort of theme, and I really appreciate them. People are very good about sending me the work that they purchase from me in their homes, and they're very open about how they feel about it. And I find that the most fulfilling part about my work.
I was also thinking too about, you may have tapped into something that's very primal, because it seems that even the most primitive of peoples have a favorite place, a place of contemplation, a glade, a glen, a valley, a mountaintop, it's a touchstone. They really have to go back there and touch that spot with their feet,
Yes.
to reconnect, to ground themselves.
I think there's a familiarity in a lot of my work that people are that's resonating with a lot of people, and because that beach, or because that cottage, or even because that person, if it's a figure, is not necessarily real, they can interpret it as they see fit, and it becomes a very personal thing for them.
I used to be a set designer for the opera, and I look at your work as well as drops, as backdrops, because there's this backdrop and there's the actors, the viewers that are standing in front of it, and it's an interesting situation where you have a piece of artwork that actually enhances the viewer. When you see them looking at the work, but they become part of the work. They're almost the secondary image of them looking at the work.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And when I get people in my studio, and I tend to be open every Sunday, or every Sunday that I'm in town anyway. Often, there isn't a Sunday that goes by that this doesn't happen multiple times. People will walk into my space and say, "Oh, now I feel good. Now I feel like I can relax." It's so funny that it has that effect, and it's not like it was intentional. But it's definitely conveying that to the majority of people that see it.
So the scale of your work. Now I know the prints fall within a certain scale, and I've seen most of your work, and I would say it's small to medium work. So I think the largest piece I've probably seen is probably like a 30, 40, something like that.
30 by 40 is, one of the larger sizes. 36 by 36 is a pretty popular large size. I'm working right now on a 48 by 24 horizontal. And 48 is the longest I've ever gone. I have another 48-inch piece as well. But the larger pieces tend to be in the 36 by 36 to 40 by 30.
All right. Have you thought of going larger?
I would be happy to go larger
on a commission,
if someone wanted it. Yeah, on a commission. Yeah.
Okay. It would have to be. Excuse me. I'm assuming because most people's houses can't accommodate really large pieces of work.
Yeah, and my studio is kind of small too, so I don't really think I'll paint like a much larger piece and put it up in my studio. So, but I'm happy to do one. I think the Coastal Contemporary Gallery in Newport has, let's see, they have a 36 by 36, and I believe they have a 30 by 40. I'm not sure. They have a number of 36 by 18s. So those are sort of on the, I guess they're somewhere between large and medium.
Yeah, that's another thing too. The odd or non-standard size pieces
Mhm.
tend to have their own vibe, their own a life of their own comparative to
Yeah.
the standard or normal size pieces.
Yeah, I have some extreme verticals that are very popular. And I started off painting my first one maybe, I think it was around 2009. And I thought, oh, I'll never do this again. And then it was popular and people loved it and it got sold. And I thought, well, I'm going to try another one. And I started to really like them myself. And I also realized how perfect they were with the roads I was interested in painting. So I have a lot of 6 by 36s, and they do tend to sell quickly. One just sold at the Coastal Contemporary Gallery a couple
Oh,
of
good,
weeks. Yeah.
good. That's interesting too, because Shari Wexler, or Sumo Bunny, is her alter ego name
Yeah.
is her sobriquet, I guess. Um, Said that for some reason that she can't quite fathom, that most of the clientele is drawn to blue.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
blue and canvases of certain size. They don't like really big ones. They I guess 1824 and up, up to 2436 is probably about what they'll want. It's an unusual thing. I mean, because as artists, we're always trying to find that sweet spot. I mean, or where am I on this scale of success? Am I just like one hair away from being able to move this piece, to sell it, or am I like a mile away from the opportunity to do so? Because it's the strangest things that turn on and turn off customers or art
Yeah.
buyers.
I find with me, whether it's the size or the composition, it's really important for me that I paint what I want to paint, and I include commissions in that too. Like if I see a commission that just isn't going to be me, I will turn it down, and I have turned them down. It's just if there's no use in it, it's if I catch myself saying I'm going to paint such and such because I think it's going to sell, or if I'm going to paint such and such a size even because I think it's going to sell, to me that's the kiss of death. I need to paint what's coming out of me, whether it's the size of the canvas or the composition that I'm interested in, because that's where the passion will be. And if that passion is not in the work, it's not going to sell. So if you try and create work with the thought that it's going to sell, I think it's the kiss of death.
It's almost like Bruce Lee's "Be Like Water,"
Yeah.
the delicate balance between intuition and mechanics.
Yeah, do what's coming out of you.
Yeah,
and stick to that.
yeah,
If you don't like it yourself, there's no reason why anyone else should.
exactly. Yeah, it's interesting how the passion, to use that term, is conveyed in work, whether it's conscious or otherwise.
Yes.
Any advice to there's a painter, a friend of my wife from Detroit, who started painting. Now I can actually say it's a painting career. She was in her 70s when she started.
Wow.
And
I thought I waited.
I know it just like took off, like it took her by surprise.
Yeah.
So what is your advice to other non-painters or people who or other artists, in fact, that are doubting themselves or trying to find that they're trying too hard?
That's a good question. I think that probably what I had said before is the best answer that applies. Continue to paint what's inside of you. Continue to express your passion on the canvas, and forget about whether you think it's going to appeal to anybody or not. That's like taking your mind into a place where you're not going to have passion in the work anymore, because you have an ulterior motive in your work. You're trying to paint something that you think is going to sell, and that's really self-defeating. Just let go of catch yourself thinking that way and say, okay, I'm going to stop myself. I'm not going to think that way. I am going to paint what I want to paint, because that's where my passion is. And that passion is going to come out on the canvas or in the sculpture or the paper or whatever the medium is. And when that passion comes out, it's going to be something that other people see, and it will bring out the passion in them too. I think that's the most important piece of advice that I could give.
Because I mean, at some point in time, logarithmic painting is going to come up. People are going to be painting to a logarithm, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
Let's
People
go to
do say that to me. They say like, well, oh, maybe the trend is for blue, or maybe the trend is for minimal. I don't know anything about the trends. I just paint what's coming out of me, and let the trends be what they are.
Yeah. It's and you never know. I remember when I first got picked up. I was picked up by the Medici Berenson Gallery in Bell Harbor, and I was doing small pieces of work, and they were really excited about my work. And the first thing that the gallerist said to me was, "Oh, darling, you must go bigger, because that's the trend now." I'm like, "Okay, you bought my work. They're like 8 by 8 inches. You told me they're little gems. Now you told me you want them by 8 by 8 feet.
That's funny.
It's the market." It's like
I've had that. A lot of gallerists have told me, to go larger too, and I have in many cases. But one thing that's common with, I think every gallery that's represented me is they've all resisted the extreme verticals until I say to them, just try it. And inevitably they're sold as soon as I send them one, because they sell right away.
I mean, everybody's got that wall that needs, it's between two doorways, or it's a doorway in the corner, and that's just like blah.
Right.
And it really
changes the space pretty dramatically.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's talk about prints. How did you get into in fact, the terminology is all over the place too. Art reproductions. What do you refer to them as?
Okay, so I only make giclée prints of my work on paper. I will not make one on canvas, even though certainly that technology exists. There's no such thing as a Paul Pedulla print on canvas. So I'll make them on paper, and I will only make them in the size that the original painting was in. And I will only sell them framed, with the buyer's choice of a white or a black wood frame. So, and they're framed under glass or plexiglass. So I actually love the way the prints come out. I think because my work is so minimalist and graphic, it lends itself to reproduction very nicely. And the prints come out super nice, and the quality is so strong that you can actually see the texture of the canvas in the print, even though it's on paper. And so I really enjoy making them, and it also keeps the image out there. It's funny, people say to me, well, if you have an original painting that someone doesn't want you to make a print of, will you honor that? I'm like, I suppose. I said, but I don't see why they'd want that, because I actually just sold an original painting of Mellow Yellow. It's on my website, Mellow Yellow. And I sold it probably 3 months ago. The woman kept bugging me to make prints. When are you going to make prints of it? I want to see the prints. And I think that the reason why is because, if you get that image out there and everybody starts getting familiar with it and people actually have it in their homes, it makes the original more valuable because, it's an unrecognizable image. So this woman was like, I want people to buy my prints of my painting because I want my painting to be, I want to be the one who has the original. So it's very interesting. I totally understand that.
It is really interesting because I mean I've spoken with experts who it's like warring parties. I mean, one will say absolutely positively not. Prints are only going to dilute your portfolio, blah 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 blah, and they go on and on and on. And then the other side will say almost exactly everything that you've said. It gets the work out there. It gets. I mean, there's only that one original.
Yeah.
And there are people in the marketplace. Let's talk as two old advertising guys. There are people in the marketplace who can only afford your print.
Right.
And it's not like they're getting, they clipped it out of a magazine.
Right.
I mean, they invested in it.
I'll only do a print of a painting once it's sold, generally.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of exceptions there, but mostly the painting has to be sold before I'll make a print of it. And they're pretty much available only through, well, I've expanded a little bit. They used to be available only through me. Saugatuck Art Traders in Michigan, they're available there too. They actually have a lot of prints in their gallery. And when they first approached me to wanting to show my work, I said I'm really stretched thin with my original paintings. And they said, well, we like the prints anyway. And I said, well, now if you want the prints, I can't make the prints and then frame them and send them to you and split the money with you because it's not going to make any sense for me to do that. So they said, okay, why don't you make the print and ship it to us just like that, and we'll frame it here and we'll pay for the framing. And I said, okay, now you're talking. We both have skin in the game, and we can do it that way.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because
the value of the prints has gone up a lot. So, and I think it's mainly because of Saugatuck. They're selling the prints for quite a bit now.
Well, demand has gone up. Yeah. I mean, and there's so many aspects to that too. I mean, the framing part, staying away from framing because if you put it in metal, they want it in wood. If you put it in natural wood, they want it in black. If you put it in black, they want it in gray.
Right.
So that's why, even with my own work, selling the prints, it's rolled, in a tube. That's it. And it's one thing I have done is that the output size is a standard frame size, so no mat is required.
Okay. I can see doing that too. I have not done that.
Yeah.
I'm pretty much sticking to the way I do it, but I can see doing that. I can see why someone would do that too.
It's also my first step too, because now I've got the time to devote to that. Question, photo versus scan of the work.
Say it again.
Photo versus scan of your work.
Okay, so all my work is scanned. That's how I get the images.
Mm-hmm.
And I use two different places for that. And they scan my work and store it in their files.
Mm-hmm.
So that before I let an original painting go to a gallery or sold to a client, I have digital record of it. So I can make prints of sold work. It's no problem.
Right.
But you need the scan to do that. I don't think it's possible to get that quality with just a photograph.
Yeah. I mean, some of the scans have the capability of scanning far more colors than the painting even contains, which is kind of an amazing thing too. We're going to start to wrap this up. How did the pandemic affect you, both positively and negatively?
Well,
as an artist,
yeah, it's funny. In January and February of 2020, last year, I was really on a roll with my work, and it was selling briskly. And even the first week of March, I got a call from a woman in Chicago who wanted an original painting of mine. As soon as I was in Miami at the time, As soon as I got back to Boston, which was March 4th of last year, I shipped her the painting. And then suddenly the world fell apart. And by March 11th, which was a week later, I was feeling lucky that I even made it back from Miami, and everything was closed. My studio building was closed to the public. The galleries that represent me were closed. Other than online representation, I was basically dead in the water. And so that lasted for, I want to say, it was all of March, certainly. In April, I had one sale in Texas because the client had the piece put in their space before the pandemic hit, and they just notified the gallery to let them know they wanted to buy it. May was completely dead. And then in June, everything opened up. My studio in Boston opened up June 15th. Sundays were busy right away. We all had masks on, and we had, all the precautions were taken. But it was as though the world was starved for work. Hold on, I'm going to shut my door.
Sure.
It was as though the world was starved for art, or people were home all the time. They didn't know what to do with themselves. So I think they were looking at their walls and they were saying, I need something else here. I'm stuck at home. I need art. And I know that contractors and interior designers were getting the same kind of reaction. People wanted their homes, they wanted an addition on their home, or they wanted a renovation, or they wanted new furniture. I think the same thing was happening with art. So long story short, 2020 was my biggest sales year ever. And 2021 so far is on track to beat it. So wow. It's very ironic, but what started off as what I thought was going to be a nightmare ended up being a real boost. I was shocked that I was selling so much work, and so much in the latter half of 2020 that it made the whole year the best sales year ever.
It's interesting because I remember doing podcasts with individuals who had never had gallery representation. They tried, and so therefore their sales were, occasional. But all of a sudden, it seemed like the world found them on the internet, and their sales, I can't say went up, their sales began.
Yeah.
Where there were successful painters, artists who made a living full time from their practice, and found themselves going, oh my God, yeah, I haven't made a dime in months because their gallery closed down. So it was this weird shift.
It's all
paradigm shift. Yeah. Wow.
It's very strange how it's affected different people in different ways. Now, in my own studio building in Boston, a lot of the artists were afraid to come in, so they couldn't open up because they weren't coming in. And the people that were coming in, everyone was masked. They were serious about buying work. We weren't getting the browsers anymore. We were getting people that really wanted work. So all of the artists that didn't come in during all that time really missed an opportunity. And I don't fault them for it. I mean, there was a lot of fear around the pandemic. I had fear myself, and I was making sure I was masked. I was making sure that everyone who came into my studio was masked. And then finally, of course, we all got vaccinated. But before that, there were a lot of people that were still coming in, but they were serious buyers.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I think, give us another 6 more months until somebody starts to evaluate or reevaluate exactly what just happened.
Yeah.
From the point of view of, art and sales and such. One final question, Paul. How would you like to be remembered?
How would I like to be remembered? Wow, you mean after I'm long gone?
After you're long gone, yeah. All the euphemisms and
That's a really good question. It's probably something I should think about more, but off the top of my head, I would say I would like to be remembered as an artist who was very accessible to people, open to them. I love it when people come into my studio. I love it when I'm at galleries that represent me and people want to talk to me about my work. I am very open to discussing my work, and I can discuss my work as though I didn't even paint it. I can look at it objectively like they can and just talk about it. Um, I I think that being open to people is a very important aspect about being an artist. For me, anyway. I love engaging with people. I think sometimes, well, should I give up my 450 Harrison Ave Boston studio space because, I don't need it. I'm represented by a lot of galleries. I could probably just maintain my website and get by that way. But I think, oh my God, all that interaction I'd be missing with people. That's like my life. So that's how I'd like to be remembered, I think.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, Paul, thank you so much. I'm going to wrap this up. Any final thoughts?
I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, Ron. It was a lot of fun. I hope to see you soon in Newport.
Yeah.
And,
The new work is, I'm trying to reestablish a new base. Going from the abstractionist whose goal was to paint nothing or nothingness to somebody who's narrating stories of people caught between rocks and hard places in history.
That's great. And if you're feeling passion for it, what could go wrong? It sounds good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, folks, we're wrapping up another edition of the In Focus podcast with our guest on this episode, painter Paul Pedulla. And remember that this podcast is made possible in part by Heavenly Spirits. And the pandemic's not totally over yet. It's not being pessimistic. It's trying to be realistic. So just continue to be nice out there to each other and stay safe. Till then, see you next time. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.